Welcome to Chapter 5 of Services Marketing. At this point, we're now really significantly transitioning from thinking about services from the customer and the customer experience to how do the actions of the organizations influence the customer experience. So what we're going to see in this section is that we're looking at part of the gap model. So we're focusing on the listening gap. And this means that when we start thinking and processing the services marketing theories, we're thinking about it from the point of view of, as marketers, how can we listen to our customers, how can we identify our customers, and work out who should be the important voice that we should be paying attention to. So in terms of the provider gap, it's a reminder that what leads to a provider gap is where we don't understand our audience and we don't have a clear audience, where we lack market research and we haven't conducted research, we haven't engaged in capturing the information that's available to us, where our frontline staff have been unable to feed back information, so the lack of upward communication, which is a missed opportunity to listen. And then we start moving into the aspects of when the customer is being dealt with directly and we lack a relationship marketing focus or we lack a service recovery protocol. So we're looking now here at this first chapter, chapter 5, being about market research and understanding what steps can we take to proactively acquire knowledge about our audience. Now, since this is market research, it's a highlights package in services marketing. There's a lot of work that's actually done on research and services research. So there's a fair amount you can hunt down through Google Scholar and just a standard Google search. But also you have access to market research textbooks in the libraries and market research techniques through Scholar, but also through the broader internet. So you can look at what would constitute good market research and think about it in terms of, these are services marketing problems that we need to resolve. How would we use market research, and what techniques of market research would we use to address these problems? So what we're going to talk about here is basically how to make use of services marketing with and in conjunction with market research. Now, where it gets really interesting is if you're a services marketer who happens to be, say, a market research agency, you get to use both in combination. But what you're also looking at here with services marketing and services research is you have the capacity to share insights from what you discover about your customers to assist the whole services community. But also, this is one of these areas where what you learn about, you can publish as a white paper or a think piece and make that contribution to the broader community, but also then be seen as a leader and a strong service provider, because the knowledge you have can be tangibilized and your services marketing expertise can be tangibilized through the publication of your research. It's not always a competitive advantage to keep it secret. So what do we use research for in services? There's a broad range of opportunities on the screen. Realistically, one of the things that we're looking at is understanding who our customer is, understanding the match between what we're offering and what we're expecting our customers to accept, a certain level of service recovery, a satisfaction rating, and also trying to gauge gaps in the market. And this is one of the areas where, if you think about the 4 pillars of services marketing, inconsistency, and the previous chapter where we started talking about the flexibility and the spontaneity, you may find an emergent service. So new product development can take place through market research, through addressing and assessing your own service delivery protocols. And if you frequently find that you are having to customize, modify, or improvise, but you're improvising around a similar common set of behaviors, then you can go and look at that as a new product development opportunity based on internal market research. So it's important to think of market research as internal and external, that your internal data, that your listening posts, your frontline staff who will be engaging with the customer become your listening agents, become your market researchers. So they're not just sales agents, they're not just services, not just the delivery mechanism for your service, they're the delivery mechanism for the customer's needs. So they become these boundary spanners who can hear what the customer wants and feed that back to the organization with the right services, upward communication protocols in place, and the right HRM practices supporting it. So what are we looking for in services? The great thing about services marketing and the market research we do is we are big on qualitative and we're big on quantitative. Some of the most amazing things that have been done in services marketing are holistic, qualitative-centered observational work, where people have gone into a service encounter and documented their personal engagement. So you have these opportunities to use both the quant and the qual. You should never exclude one over the other. You should look at it from the point of view of you have a broad set of tools, but you're trying to measure the intangible, invisible, inseparable. So you're going to have to consume the service, either as a provider or a deliverer, to fully appreciate what's happening at the transaction, at the point of consumption and the point of production. So we have a whole series of tools and techniques. I just want to bring your attention to a couple of these that are interesting. For us as marketers and marketing researchers, so speaking here as the academic, ServQual is a huge tool for us. It's one we're actually going to mention again in a couple of slides' time. The ones that are interesting, if you can get to work on, are mystery shopping, and where we look at this also in terms of checkpoints and process evaluation. So working as a service provider and going through the service chain, making certain that the elements you think are in place are actually happening, then doing this as a mystery shopper, coming in and experiencing the service to ensure that what you think you are presenting, and particularly as a mystery shopper, your job is to go through and experience the service cold, with no background, no expectation, no elements, to be able to document what takes place and how the process works for you. There's a lot of fun stuff to do in here. So it's not just statistics and surveys. There's a lot of really interesting things we can do for services. So when we come down to it, the key thing about services though is that we need to deal with customers. We can go up front and we can ask directly. In fact, customer engagement is probably one of the best things in this, insofar as if you empower your staff to talk to the customers, to get the customers to experience, but also when you empower your staff, get them to find out the good as well as the bad. You'll note that we have this concept of the customer complaint solicitation. There's a minor bug in that process is you are basically asking a customer to think about what went wrong, so they're going to come out with a negative attitude towards your service. And they'll hopefully look for problems to answer your question. So you also want to ask them what went right. In terms of observation, so this is where you get some fun stuff in terms of using your skills as an ethnographic observational researcher, where you can bring in, actually bring in anthropology, you can bring in the ethnography, you can bring in psychology. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. We also have access to the big data, the database marketing research. So you have this capacity to use loyalty incentive cards, use various tracking mechanisms. One of the things that's really interesting is when we start capturing behavior through data analysis is that we still need a hypothesis. The key thing to remember in all of this is you collect data to answer a question. Data in itself is meaningless. Data without a question, data without a purpose is useless. So if you're going to be in a position to generate data, you want to have questions that that data answers. So just because you can capture it doesn't mean you should, and just because you've got it doesn't mean it's useful. So you need to know what it is you want to understand, what you want to address, and how you're going to address it with a data collection protocol. In terms of breaking down some of the parts into depth, with this, what I want you to be doing is I want you to look at these as means by which, if you are asked to address a case study. So on the screen, you've got these series of different approaches. Now, each of these approaches, complaint solicitation, post-transaction survey, each of those will have been documented, written up, and given some detail, which you can hunt down through Google Scholar. Now, there's a specific reason why I'm tasking you with a secondary data research project. A challenge we often face in services is that we will quite frequently in our market research assume that just because we have an intangible product, we have to go immediately to primary research. Since you are a student of the ANU, you have access to one of the largest and most amazingly resourced libraries of existing research. So what you want to be doing is, whilst you're on campus, is you want to be using the ProQuest database. You want to be using Google Scholar. You want to be using Informa. You want to be going through the library databases to seek out what knowledge already exists. So at certain points, you're going to need to collect original data, particularly because you're dealing with your own survey that has to ask questions about your own product and your own service deployment. But you can learn a lot from what's already taken place. And I would emphasize really strongly that what you want to be doing is, before you undertake one of these approaches, is you want to look at the background information. Who else has done this? What else has been done before? What are some of the common strengths of this methodology? What are its weaknesses? What knowledge exists in the marketplace that I can draw on and I can capitalize on to, instead of having to create my own from scratch measure of quality, what existing measures are in place that I just need to change the brand name or change the wrapper and the label. And the case in point for that is ServQual. Now, the ServQual survey is it's a set of expectations and perceptions questions. ServQual was designed to be a template that you could administer on your service and change. So instead of it being here, should have up-to-date equipment, you could mention your brand name. So the ANU should have up-to-date equipment. And then, since this is an expectation, your perception survey would be the ANU does have up-to-date equipment. So this survey is a template. And if you think about using this and other methods as templates that you can adapt and adjust, what you're doing is you're building on existent knowledge. You're building on what is already known, so it makes it faster, cheaper, and quicker. And it makes it a stronger research protocol to be adapting in what already is known and making use of that, rather than having to go through your own process of DIY construction, because you might miss a key point out. And having developed surveys over time and having developed scales for surveys, you're looking at 18 months to 2 years to do it properly. And really, you just want an answer next week, so you might as well find what already exists. Alright, now, the key thing to market research is that there are a variety of techniques, all of which generate data. And data, in its own right, is meaningless unless you convert data to information. And information, basically, data is the raw material, information is the processed material. But even that isn't useful until the information is acted upon, either to make a decision, to reinforce a decision, to support a decision, or correct an error. So until information is acted upon and becomes knowledge, it itself has no inherent value. So you don't want to collect stuff for the sake of collecting. You want to be using your data collection tools and techniques to answer a specific problem, solve a specific problem, find out a specific piece of information, address a hypothesis, so that you can then move through and use what you've gathered. There's no point gathering if you're not going to use it. And lastly, this is the It's a short series of slides because it's a big topic area. It's one where there's a lot of self-exploration. It's a lot of where it's very interest-driven. If you're a big qualitative fan, look up the qualitative techniques. You can specialize as a qualitative researcher in services. Similarly, if you come from a maths and numbers background and you like the quantitative, there's a lot of stuff we do with structural equation modeling, partial least squares, a lot of statistics, and there's a lot of consumer decision-making, choice modeling that comes into services marketing. And services marketing, because it's intangible, really lends itself to descriptive, projective, and a lot of the techniques that really support decision-making. And as such, what I'm asking you to do with this chapter is pursue the areas of research technique that you find to be interesting. So the last thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about upward communication. And this is a critical part to services because what you're looking at here is you need to recognize that one of the consequences of having a product that is based on people is that your frontline people, the people who deliver the service, gain knowledge of your product offering, and your customer that may exceed your own knowledge as the product designer, product implementer, or as the marketer who sits in the back and doesn't actually deliver any goods to the front end. So these highly skilled, highly resourced individuals should be used and should be engaged and should be allowed to contribute their knowledge back into the firm. And quite often one of the role stress issues that comes up is where frontline staff are blocked from upward communication because of a top-down managerialism approach to either the HRM or the internal resourcing or the marketing, where it's seen as marketing is a department on its own, service delivery is a department on its own, marketing tells service delivery what to do, service delivery doesn't know what it's doing without marketing saying so. It's a real loss of huge amounts of rich data that can make a difference often between the life and death of the organization. So you want to put people on the front line, you want to be listening to your customers, you want to be listening to your staff, you want to be checking in on how the internal processes are flowing. Are there stresses and strains in the back end of the system? And this is where, when we move into aspects such as service design and service blueprinting, I want you to be looking back. I want you to get yourself familiar with different techniques here. And then when we get to service design and service blueprinting, you can look back and say, well, how would I capture this information? What of my marketing research techniques would be useful to be applied here for me to gain the knowledge I need to make my service? So it's a short one, this chapter, because market research is an independent, full standalone unit for most places, and there are a lot of market research techniques, so pursue the ones of interest. You can be selective, you can find out the parts you think are most interesting for you, that you'd most like to use, and apply those. As always, if you need me, at Stephen Dan or stephen.dan@anu.edu.au. If you want to connect further and you want to learn more about the research aspect of marketing research, definitely Google Scholar is your first port of call, but also remember that there's a large market out there for someone who can talk services theory and who can collect data and solve problems for services marketers. So this is one of these areas where a lot of self-development, a lot of training, get your market research skills up, work with the Marketing Society of Australia, train on where you can for market research skills, either at an agency or with an advertising agency or a market research agency, and with a services focus, particularly if you're good with people and you're good at listening and synthesizing information, you may find this to be a really good career path to take away from services marketing.